Hey, hello guys, Jorge here. Welcome to a new illustration of this Cyclops commission. It was rendered with markers, colors, and a little bit of airbrush. We're starting out with the line art done in Prismacolor. The idea here was using colored pencils instead of black ink. The reason I do that is to add a little bit of more of a subtle line work that can be tinted later on when I start using the markers. I always pick to use a darker value pencil to help better define the shapes, and this will be the groundwork which I'm going to be building on top of later on when I start adding my flats with the markers. So for the coloring stage, I first started with the markers to lay down the flats. I get asked frequently how to get an even and smooth tone with the markers. And while there are some challenges, here are some of the rules that I tend to follow when laying down my markers. The first thing is always take into consideration the type of paper you're using. Good quality paper like hot press watercolor paper are great since they are built for wet mediums like the markers. There are other viable options like Bristol made for markers too. Secondly, making sure your markers are well filled. Markers who run out of ink will lead to inconsistent strokes. I usually save those type of markers for fade effects later on. Also, when laying down your flat tones, make sure to fill the paper with the color pigment to get an even result. Some papers soak the ink differently than others, so pay attention to how even the tone is. If there are inconsistencies in the tone, then give it another pass. And lastly, plan ahead. Make sure to break up your drawing into individual areas. Markers have a hard time filling large areas, so break it up in pieces helps to combat that. An example is if you're doing a torso, break up the pecs from the ribcage to the abs, etc., and then fill them individually rather than filling the whole piece in one stroke. Next up, I start adding shadows. For solar shadows, I'll go over with the same marker just to add slight depth in some areas. And for darker shadows, I'll add a darker hue. Remember to always test your tones on a separate piece of paper since markers' colors tend to change when dry. I usually use 2 to 3 shadow coats, as the darker the tone, the less area it covers. And my first shadow pass is enough to achieve a good light source, contrast, and volume. If you don't achieve this on your first shadow pass, then it's probably advised to revisit the reference material and figure out why it's not working. Afterwards, I detailed the yellow parts of the gear with some darker yellow Copic. It's important to understand materials and how they behave when lit. For the visor, I knew he wanted to have a metallic look to it. So to achieve this, I recommend looking at reference. But I like to simplify the visuals by giving it the darker value very close to the visor reflection. It's all about the values and where your reflection highlights are placed. You can achieve this look with just 3 tones. One for the highlight, one for the base material, and one for the shadow. By placing them correctly, it gives the visor the metallic glint, which occurs when placing the midtones close together and leaving that bright hot spot. Remember to keep it consistent with your light source. hair has similar treatment, I want it to look silky. So just as metal, you can get that silk look by placing mid-tones areas close together and leaving that highlight gap. Notice how it's just a straight line being sided by the upper and lower mid-tone values. So for the background, I decided to go with a striking red-pink blast stripe. I think it improves the overall composition and makes for a more dynamic image. I laid down a marker layer first with a hot fluorescent pink, but halfway through I realized I was running out of ink. So thankfully I had a similar color close by and that did the trick. And after this, I just added the masking film on top of the drawing and very gently I started cutting around the silhouette with an X-Acto knife. I know this process can be scary thinking that you're actually cutting on top of your drawing, but it's just with very gentle pressure. You can cut around the film without damaging the actual drawing. So after I lay down the masking film, I go with an airbrush with acrylics and just give it a gentle glaze with the hot pink tones, just to add some ambience and fade to the background. Then I remove the film and spray a little bit more on top of the character. This is just very gently, just to integrate both characters into the background and make the whole scene more cohesive. After this is dried, I can go over again with the Prismacolor just to give some highlights and shadows and just add in details all around. This is when I bring the white Posca just to additionally add any hot spots with white ink on certain reflections around. Hope you enjoyed the process. Thank you for watching and see you in a later video.